Graveyard Murmurs. 19th October, 1684. An ancient graveyard stood in a secluded village. It was almost covered with thick forests, and at times surrounded by steep mountains, giving it a misty view. It stood in an air of fearfulness and respect, due to its relation to the past history of a place that people in the neighborhood have learned from its legends. Weird incidents often took place beyond its gate, and whoever crossed that gate after twilight, especially during night times, returns with pale-looking faces and haunted eyes, people believe. The village, called Valewood, seemed a strange place, full of loneliness and mystery. Its villagers, who had lived there for generations, bore the stories of the past in their hearts, which were told in hushed voices around fires and shared with fearful glances. However, the graveyard was more than just a place to bury people. It was said to be a place where the dead did not rest, but murmured in the night, calling out to those who were willing to listen. It was the year 1684 when young Mardan, a fearless and curious boy of 18, decided he could no longer ignore the strange happenings surrounding the graveyard. He grew up with the tales of these ones more awful than those told the night before. The curiosity had him search for answers, and the mutterings of the dead could even be heard at noon as the wind whispers voices through the very dirt under his feet. He was advised to steer clear, but Mardan was never one to retreat from things unknown. One crisp autumn evening, when the sun had dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in hues of dark purple and orange, Mardan made up his mind. Armed with nothing but his determination and a small lantern, he set out towards the graveyard, his heart pounding with both excitement and dread. The path to the graveyard was narrow and winding. Ancient trees bordered it, and their gnarled branches, like outstretched arms, twisted across each other, embracing the ground. As Mardan walked, the air grew colder, and the quiet forest seemed to hold its breath. With every step he took, Mardan felt this growing sense of unease. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets, were eerily absent. All that could be heard was the soft crunch of dead leaves beneath his boots. As he crested a small hill, the graveyard came into view, the iron gates looming in the distance like the mouth of a dark cave. The wind creaked them open with a groan of rusty hinges, protesting Mardan's arrival. He pushed on, however, driven by his desire to know the truth. As he passed through the gate, the atmosphere seemed to change. The world outside the graveyard, which was once familiar, seemed to fade away, replaced by oppressive stillness. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Mardan felt a chill crawl up his spine as he gazed at the rows of weathered gravestones, their inscriptions worn away by centuries of exposure to the elements. Some were nearly buried under vines, while others were barely standing, leaning to one side as if the ground itself was trying to swallow them whole. The murmurs began shortly after Mardan entered the graveyard. At first, they were faint, like the whispers of a distant crowd, but as he ventured deeper into the cemetery, the voices grew clearer. They were incomprehensible at first, a jumble of words and sounds that seemed to shift with the wind. Mardan stopped in his tracks, straining to hear, but the voices never quite made sense. It was as if the spirits were speaking in a language long forgotten by the living. He moved forward, following the path between the gravestones, his lantern casting long, flickering shadows across the ground. As he passed an old mausoleum, he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye, a figure standing among the tombs. It was a shadowy form, its features obscured by the darkness. Mardan froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure did not move, nor did it make a sound. For a moment, Mardan wondered if his eyes were playing tricks on him, but when he blinked, the figure was still there, watching. Swallowing his fear, Mardan stepped closer. The figure did not move. She was a sculpture of night, a statue molded from night's own substance. As he reached near, the figure began slowly to dissolve as if being pulled apart by the wind. The whispers sounded louder, now unmistakable in the tone, the voices sounding like they are calling for him. Mardan. He turned around, startled by the noise, but saw no one. The name was ringing in his head, though, and Mardan couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was beckoning him further into the graveyard. The voice came again, clearer, more insistent. It was as if the earth itself was calling to him, urging him to unearth the secrets buried beneath the tombstones. He took a deep breath, curiosity overcoming his fear. The lantern flickered as he stepped toward the center of the graveyard, where the oldest and most weathered gravestones stood. Among them, he found a tomb that was different from the others. This tomb was larger, with stone pillars cracked with age, but still imposing. In the center of the tomb was an inscription, barely visible, covered by moss and ivy. Mardan crouched down, brushing away the foliage, and read the faded words. "Here lies the bloodline of Valewood, cursed for eternity." As Mardan read the inscription, the whispers grew louder, now overlapping each other. He could feel a cold presence creeping up behind him. The lantern flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows on the ground. His heart raced as he stood up and turned around, only to find himself face to face with a figure. A tall man, pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow and empty. Mardan tried to speak, but his throat was dry, the words failing him. The man reached out a bony hand, his fingers brushing against Mardan's arm. A wave of cold washed over him, and for a split second, he could hear the man's voice, low and rasping. "You should not have come." Before Mardan could react to the apparition, it disappears, leaving behind only a creepy silence of the graveyard. His mind was full of racing thoughts as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The air was heavy with an oppressive feeling, with the very ground seeming alive with whispers of the dead. Glancing up once more at the tomb, he saw that Mardan noticed something had suddenly materialized that hadn't existed in that tomb before. One glinted, faint and silver brown, within the dim-lit beam of his lantern, a symbol etched within that cold stone, a seal. A binding sigil such as only he was lucky to see, in older of texts found in villages that showed that the text talked of an actual curse of their clan. The murmurs grew louder, swirling around him like a storm. The graveyard spirits were restless, and Mardan was caught in the web. His thoughts ran as fast as he could, but every time he tried to go away, the murmurs grew stronger. He could now hear them, pleading and accusing, calling his name. With a last look at the accursed tomb, Mardan turned to leave, but the path he had entered seemed to have vanished. The once clear road was now overgrown, and the fog had thickened to the point where it was impossible to see more than a few feet. The whispers became deafening, drowning out everything else. It was then that Mardan realized he was no longer alone. Mardan's heart was racing as he stood frozen, staring at the accursed tombstone, the symbol glowing faintly in the dim light of his lantern. He could feel the chill of the graveyard creeping into his very bones, and the whispers, now more distinct than ever, were like a constant hum in the back of his mind. They were no longer mere sounds in the air, but rather voices that came from inside him, pushing him to stay, listen, and discover the mysteries hidden for centuries. He took a nervous step backward, his eyes darting hither and yon round the graveyard, searching any which way for some vestige of movement, a figure that might be lingering in the shadows. Now the fog had thicked up, swallowing the stones and the mausoleums in an eerie mist, suffocating rather than cold. The very path he had entered through was now obscured, as though the graveyard itself had shifted, trapping him behind its accursed walls. Mardan's breath caught in his throat as he realized that the whispers were not just coming from the air around him. They were coming from the tombstones themselves, as if the stones were speaking, their voices overlapping with the eerie murmurs of the dead. "Mardan, Mardan." He turned toward the sound, lantern casting fleeting shadows across tombstones. But there was nothing there, only rows upon rows of gravestones, each one older, more weathered than any other. The voices had persisted, drawing him further into the heart of the graveyard. He struggled forward, forcing himself to move through the flickering light of his lantern. Every step was laborious, as if the earth itself were pulling down on him, trying to drag him into its blackness. He could feel the weight of the spirits around him, their cold eyes watching from the shadows, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. Mardan stopped in front of another mausoleum. Stone doors cracked open only by the slightest fraction of an inch. The sight gave Mardan the chill. However, he wasn't about to go back for it. What he discovered already was worth facing such fears. He took his breath and opened the door further, which was covered by grinding stone noises on this quiet night. Inside, the air was chilled to an even greater degree than outside, and the shadows seemed to push in against him from all sides. The faint light of his lantern revealed the remains of what appeared to be a burial chamber from an old age. Thick dust rested on the stone floors. The air was stale and had the smell of decaying things. Mardan stepped into the place slowly, his heart racing and scanning the room. At the far end there was an altar, which the moss and cobwebs half buried. But it wasn't the altar that he gazed at. It was the body on the stone slab. The figure was a man, his body decayed and mummified with age. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, and his once regal clothing was now tattered and shredded. But it wasn't the body that made Mardan's blood run cold. It was the look on the man's face, his eyes wide open as if staring straight through him, frozen in an expression of agony. Mardan took a step closer, unable to look away from the man's face. His stomach twisted with unease as he saw something strange. The man's lips were moving, but no sound was coming out of his mouth. The whispers that had followed Mardan since he entered the graveyard seemed to be coming from the body itself, as if the man was still trying to speak, even in death. Mardan. The voice was hardly audible, yet Mardan heard it clearly. The knees buckled and he fell back, but his hand went to the stone wall, steadying himself against it. The voice continued, growing stronger with each passing second. It wasn't just the man's voice anymore. It was a chorus of voices, speaking in unison, each one telling the same story. A story of betrayal, death, and an unholy curse that had bound the spirits of the dead to the graveyard for eternity. The bloodline of Valewood. The words echoed in Mardan's mind, and he realized that the man before him was no ordinary corpse. He was the patriarch of the cursed family, the one who had made the fatal mistake that had led to the suffering of generations. The whispers grew louder, becoming a cacophony of voices that seemed to shake the very foundations of the tomb. The curse. It is our legacy. Mardan's head spun, and the room seemed to spin with it. The whispers were too much to bear, their intensity making his ears ring. The air around him seemed to grow thick, suffocating, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse. He stretched out a shaking hand to the patriarch's body, as if drawn by some unseen force, and when his fingers touched the stone, a jolt of energy surged through him, sending him tumbling to the ground. He crashed to the ground, the lantern falling from his grasp and flickering out as it hit the stone floor. In the darkness, the whispers continued, but they were no longer words. They were screams, agonized, tortured screams that seemed to tear through the air, echoing off the stone walls of the tomb. Mardan struggled up, his heart thumping in his chest. He got to his feet, his breath shallow and fast, as the voices began to grow quieter. He had no idea how long he lay there, but it might as well have been time itself that had stopped for all he knew. With a great effort, he stood up. The tomb was silent now, save for the soft rustling of the wind outside. But the air felt different, heavier, as though the very presence of the spirits was pressing down on him. The patriarch's body remained motionless on the altar, but the dark, hollow eyes seemed to be watching him, following his every move. Slowly, Mardan retreated backward, his pulse pounding in his chest. He needed to get out. He needed to escape this curse, slowly consuming him. He turned to leave the mausoleum, his back straight. It was there in the corner of the room that he spotted it. A small chest, dust-covered, with cobwebs dangling in front. Something about it was speaking to him, reaching him, and with hesitation, Mardan made his way towards it. He kneeled in front of the chest, slowly opening the lid. Inside lay a collection of old scrolls, their parchments yellowed with age. Writing in an unknown language lay on them, but he recognized the symbols. He had seen them in the ancient texts within the village, the very symbols that had been used to place the curse on the Valewood bloodline and trap their spirits within the graveyard forever. Mardan's fingers shook as he reached out to take one of the scrolls. The moment his skin touched the parchment, he felt a rush of energy, dark and malevolent, which threatened to overwhelm him. The whispers, now louder than ever, surged in his mind, screaming at him to leave, to burn the scrolls, to destroy the curse once and for all. But Mardan could not get up. He was immobile beneath the weight of discovery. The scrolls were the key to end the curse. But what would that cost him? The spirits of Valewood would never let him go out from the graveyard alive if he tries to break the curse. Mardan knew then that his journey had only just begun. The curse had been waiting for him, for his bloodline. And now that he had uncovered its secrets, there was no turning back. The chill in the air had deepened since Mardan had first set foot in the graveyard. What had begun as a simple search for answers had now become a relentless, suffocating nightmare. The whispers hadn't stopped since that moment when he touched the ancient scroll. With each passing hour, they grow louder, more insistent. The whispers in the wind evolved into a chorus of angry voices, pleading, warning him of what was waiting for him if he continued the way he was going. The fog rolled thick, curling around him as if it were a living being, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. It was as if the graveyard itself had come alive, its very ground twisting and shifting beneath his feet. Mardan's lantern flickered weakly in his hand, casting faint shadows on the gravestones that seemed to leer at him from all directions. Every step he took felt heavier, as if the spirits of the dead were trying to pull him deeper into the earth. His mind was in turmoil. The scrolls he found were potent ones. The contents within spoke of dark and forbidden themes. It was the kind of curse that bound the souls of the Valewood family unto this cursed land. Yet only through the blood of the living could such a curse be broken. Still, Mardan had not prepared himself for what followed. The scrolls had revealed an even darker truth. The curse was not just confined to the Valewood bloodline, it had spread to everyone who had dared to disturb the graveyard. As he walked through the fog, the weight of his discovery hung heavy on him. His ancestors had been connected to the Valewoods in ways he couldn't yet fathom. The curse was in his blood. The whispers had made it plain that he was now a part of it, an unwilling participant in a ritual that had been set in motion centuries ago. Mardan could feel eyes on him, spirits watching, waiting. He was no longer alone in the graveyard. The air had grown heavy with an oppressive, unnatural silence. Every sound muffled, as if the very graveyard itself was holding its breath. Mardan's pulse quickened when he turned a corner into the face of an ancient mausoleum, stone walls covered in ivy and moss. The entrance was blocked by a rusted iron gate with twisted and bent bars that seemed as if something was trying to force its way out. The whispers grew louder, urgent. Mardan paused, an odd compulsion to go inside growing strong. He felt compelled to find what was kept within, to uncover its secrets no matter the cost. However, when he reached the entrance, a weird phenomenon occurred. The whispers vanished, and in their place, the low growl rumbled in from within the mausoleum, almost from within its walls. A shadow moved within, something large, something alive. Mardan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He had heard the tales, the rumors that the Valewood family had once practiced dark rituals, summoning entities from beyond the grave, but he had dismissed them as nothing more than superstition. Now, standing before this cursed mausoleum, Mardan wondered if there was any truth to those stories. He stepped closer, his breath shallow, the growl growing louder. Then, without warning, the gate creaked open, as if responding to his presence. The sound was like the grinding of ancient bones, sending a shiver down his spine. Mardan couldn't turn back. The pull of the curse, the pull of the whispers, was too strong. He stepped through the gate, the air inside the mausoleum cold and damp. The stone walls took an eerie glow from his lantern, revealing strange symbols etched into the surfaces. The room was enormous and seemed filled with shadows that seemed to writhe and shift like the very walls themselves came alive. On the far end of the room stood a figure, its back turned on him. He was tall, shrouded in black, with the silhouette indistinct within the shadows. "Who is there?" Mardan's voice trembled, but he could not turn back now. His curiosity, his need to know the truth, was overwhelming. The figure didn't say anything. It just turned, and Mardan gasped in horror. The face was a grotesque mask of decay. The skin was stretched taut over its skull. Its eyes were hollow black voids, swallowing the light. Its mouth opened, and Mardan could hear the same whispers that had haunted him since his arrival. Only now they were coming from the figure itself. "The curse. It is ours to bear." The words echoed in Mardan's mind, reverberating through the very bones of the mausoleum. The figure moved toward him, its steps slow and deliberate. Mardan's body froze, rooted to the spot, as if the shadows themselves had bound him in place. You disturb us," said the figure, its voice a rasping hiss. "The blood of Valewood runs in your veins. You are one of us now. You cannot escape the curse." Mardan's throat constricted. He had heard the stories, the tales of those who had attempted to break the curse of Valewood, but they had all failed. Every last one of them had been consumed by the graveyard, their bodies lost to the shadows, their souls trapped forever in the mists. And now, it seemed, he was no different. "No," Mardan panted, shaking his head. "I didn't choose this. I didn't know. I only wanted to—" "To what?" The figure cut him off, its hollow eyes narrowing. "To seek the truth? To undo what was done? You cannot change what has already been set in motion. The curse will claim you, as it has claimed us all." Mardan's pulse quickened. His mind raced, and for a moment he considered running. But the whispers, the growls, the oppressive darkness, it was all closing in around him. There was no escape. He had stepped too far into the abyss. "You have summoned the darkness spirits of Valewood," it continued, its voice a low, mocking tone. "And now they shall come for you. It is their night, and when it is dark, no one is safe." Before Mardan could say anything, the ground beneath his feet began to shake. The walls of the mausoleum groaned as if they were alive, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay. The figure's face twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. Its hands reached out toward him, claws extended, ready to tear him apart. Mardan took a step back, his heart beating against his chest. He wheeled around to run away, but the doors of the mausoleum slammed shut, echoing deafeningly in the dark, trapping him in it. The shadows engulfed him, and the whispers grew louder, voices that now seemed to emanate from every direction, a cacophony maddening to his mind. "Run, Mardan, run, or die." There was nowhere to run to, though. The darkness engulfed him. The air was stifling within the mausoleum. The darkness seemed to press in from all directions, like the walls themselves were turning in to crush Mardan. The whispers faded away and were replaced by the beat of his heart, sounding like a drumline of foreboding doom. Every breath grew heavier, every movement slow, like the air itself was heavy and thick with a malignant presence. Mardan's hands trembled as he clutched the lantern tighter, its weak light flickering in the ever-growing darkness. The mausoleum, with its decaying stones and oppressive atmosphere, felt alive, its walls pulsating with an ancient energy. The figure, the one that had spoken to him, had disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the cold chill of its presence. But Mardan knew it wasn't truly gone. Still it lay in wait, hiding from sight, observing him, anticipating his error. He sat there in his chair and strove to try and remember just what was going on. The figure had informed him he was of the curse, that the blood from Valewood flowed in his very system. The same blood that had become tainted by generations of dark rituals that had tied the souls of Valewoods to this very grave. But Mardan didn't understand. How could that be? His family had never spoken of such things. He had never heard one mention of curses or dark magic or binding rituals by blood. But now, as the whispers returned, growing louder once more, he understood. The curse had never been a mere tale. It had been real, far more real than he could have ever imagined. And now, he was caught in its grip. Ground shuddered beneath him once more. The rumbles were deep and menacing, as if the graves themselves were waking to a life from a slumber. A chill crept up the spine of Mardan. His neck turned for him to glance up. The shadows shifting like darkness moved itself, the warping of the walls twisting to bend as the very air they breathed in exhaled the one around him. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement. It was a figure, a shape that shifted in and out of the darkness, its form indistinct, its movements erratic. The whispers had become clearer now, and Mardan could make out the words, "Release us. Release us." It took on full form now, emerging from the shadows, and Mardan could see it properly before his eyes. The figure was that of a man. His face was gaunt and twisted in agony, the hollowed outness of his eyes, his mouth stretched in a grotesque grimace. He stretched out his long, bony fingers toward Mardan, trying to grasp him across the space. You are the key," the man raspily said, his hollow whisper seeming to echo around in Mardan's mind. "The blood of Valewood family. You have to end this. You have to let us free." Mardan's chest was heaving in heavy gasps as he retreated backward, his breath coming in thin gasps. The man's words were laced with fear, but part of him couldn't help but feel a truth to them. The curse had taken hold of his ancestors 1,000 years ago, and it had now claimed him as its own. But how? How could he break such an ancient, all-consuming curse? The figure moved closer, the thudding of his footfalls sounding in the stillness of the mausoleum. Mardan felt the heavy weight of the man's presence, the cold that emanated from his form. Yet there was something else, something darker, something that gnawed at Mardan's very soul. "The curse cannot be broken," the man continued, his voice now a low growl. "Not by any mortal. It can only be undone by blood, the blood of the living. And you, Mardan, you are the one who must give it." Mardan's eyes widened in horror. The blood of the living? The figure wanted him to sacrifice someone, to end the curse by spilling innocent blood? "No," Mardan's voice cracked as he took another step back. "I will not do that. I won't be a part of this." The laugh of the figure went on ringing inside the mausoleum, rattle of dry bones it was. "You've already made your choice, Mardan. The moment you stepped into this graveyard, you made your choice. And now you have to finish what's begun. The souls of the Valewoods, the souls of those who came before you, are bound to you now, and only with blood will they be set free." The man's eyes gleamed with an unnatural hunger, and as he took another step toward Mardan, the ground trembled once again. Mardan could feel the very earth beneath him shift, as if the graveyard itself was reacting to the figure's words, responding to his presence. "No!" Mardan shouted, his voice full of desperation. "I won't be a part of this. I'll find another way." But as he uttered those words, deep in his subconsciousness, he knew there was no other way. Whispers had grown louder and louder now, and Mardan could hear them all around him, a chorus of voices calling out in unison. "Blood, blood, let's out." Mardan stumbled backward, his eyes wild as he searched for an escape. But the mausoleum had become a maze, walls shifting and twisting, closing behind him with a finality that sent a chill through his bones. It was closing in on him now, the hands outstretched toward him, burning eyes full of unnatural hunger. Mardan felt the weight of the curse press down upon him, the weight of souls trapped within this place, each one clawing at him, pulling him toward the inevitable. "Please." "No," Mardan whispered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the whispers. But the figure was relentless, its hand now inches from his chest, its claws extended, ready to tear into his flesh. And in that pure terror moment, Mardan understood. The curse had never had anything to do with revenge. It had never been about anger or hatred. It was always about the souls of the Valewoods trapped here forever, waiting to be free by some person. Mardan's breath caught in his throat as the figure's claws scraped against his skin with the cold fire that ran up and down his veins. And in the eyes, tenderly sorrowful, for once, Mardan saw it all. He saw the truth of the curse. Souls never upset by angry, wrathful nature, but lost. What the cycle of suffering spanned for generations could now end, but only if those could now receive release. He would soon find the shadowed surround of him begin pulling itself away. The figure eased back his grasp into the darkness, which its shape melted back from his gaze. "You have chosen, Mardan," the figure whispered, its voice now calm. "You have chosen the only path that can save us all. The blood of the living, the blood of the Valewood family, is what binds us, and it is what will set us free." Mardan's knees gave way, and he fell to the ground. The weight of his decision lay upon his shoulders. The whispers ceased, and an oppressive yet relieving silence filled the air. He was no longer alone, and thus the curse has caught him. But in his heart of hearts, he realized that it was not yet too late. There's still a way to break the spell. There's still a chance for him to end the pains which for so many years have strangled his family to such cursed land. But who shall pay? The wind howled through the twisted branches of the trees, carrying with it the faint echoes of distant whispers. The graveyard was deathly still, holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The ground beneath Mardan's feet felt cold and unforgiving, as if it was trying to pull him down with every step he took. The weight of the curse, the weight of his decision, hung heavily around his neck like an iron collar. Before him, the mausoleum rose in ancient stone, with years of dark and negligence on its worn skin. Air was so heavy around it that stank, reek of decay stuck on this place like some sort of a shroud of death. Mardan knew he made a decision now, to break free forever or condemn himself into darkness. Final ritual of the curse would seal either. He couldn't get away from it. He had heard the whispers already, louder now, calling out for him with a desperation that sent shivers down his spine. They were no longer faint, far-off whispers, but voices full of urgency, a desperate call to be set free. The souls inside the graveyard were waiting for him. The figure who led him this far was gone, but Mardan knew it was watching him, just out of sight, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the ritual to be completed. And in that moment, Mardan understood that there was no turning back. The curse had claimed him, but it had also given him the power to undo it. He had to end it. He had to end the suffering of the Valewoods, even if it meant sacrificing everything. He reached the entrance to the mausoleum. A large iron door slowly creaked open to acknowledge his arrival. Air inside was suffocating. The walls were pressing upon him like the very tombs of the dead. The weak lantern light flickered dimly to cast long shadows across stone floors. Mardan advanced with his footsteps echoing hollow silence. There, at the far end of the mausoleum, was the altar. It was simple, weathered by time and neglect, but there was something sinister about it. The stone was stained, as if bathed in blood. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to shimmer in the faint light, and Mardan could almost hear them calling to him, urging him to complete the ritual. A voice whispered from the darkness, its tone low and filled with dread. "You have come. At last." Mardan's heart was racing. He spun around, but the figure was nowhere to be seen. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the space with an oppressive force. It was the same voice he had heard in the graveyard, the one that had guided him, the one that had told him what to do. But this time, the voice was different. It was colder, darker, more malevolent. "You have a choice, Mardan," the voice went on. "You can complete the ritual and free the souls of the Valewoods, but the cost will be great. You must offer your own blood, your own life to break the curse. Only then will the souls be released. But if you fail, if you hesitate, the curse will bind you forever, and the souls will never find peace." Mardan's fists clenched, the weight of the decision crushing him. He could hardly bear the thought of sacrificing his own life to free the souls of his ancestors. Then again, he remembered their pain, their suffering, their endless torment. He remembered the hollow eyes, the twisted faces, the anguished whispers. They had been trapped in this accursed place for centuries, their spirits bound to the land by a dark power that refused to let them go. And now, it was up to him to break that bond. He could feel the presence of the figure drawing closer, the air around him growing colder with each passing moment. Mardan knew that time was running out. The longer he waited, the more the curse would tighten its grip on him. He could already feel it gnawing at his soul, the darkness creeping in, filling his thoughts with doubt and fear. The voice again, more insistent this time. "Now is the time for the ritual. No time remains. The souls await. They will not pardon you if you do not do it." Mardan's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the icy fingers of fear tightening around his chest, squeezing the breath out of his lungs. Yet, at that moment, he knew what he had to do. He had come this far, he could not back out now. With trembling hands, Mardan stepped forward toward the altar, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. The lantern flickered one final time before going out, leaving him in complete darkness. But it didn't matter. He could feel the presence of the souls all around him, their restless energy filling the air, urging him on. He put his hands on the altar, his fingers brushing over the ancient symbols carved into the stone. The instant his skin touched the chill surface, the ground beneath him started to tremble. Walls of the mausoleum began to shift, shadows swirling around him like a living thing. The air became thick and suffocating, like the very fabric of reality was bending and warping in response to the ritual. A single chilling voice echoed in his mind. "Give your blood, Mardan. Only then will the curse be broken." Mardan took a deep breath. His heart pounded in his chest as he knew what he had to do. He lifted his hand, the sharp edge of the altar's stone digging into his palm as he pressed down hard. Blood dripped onto the stone, pooling around the symbols. As soon as the blood was in contact with the altar, the ground started trembling violently. The air cooled even further, and the whispers seemed deafening, like souls crying out in pain of the Valewoods. Mardan felt a burning pain in his chest, as if something within him was tearing at the inside. The darkness took him in, as he was pulled into the deep earth. But then, in that moment of agony, something shifted. The pain stopped. The darkness receded, and a light began to fill the mausoleum, a warm golden light that pushed the shadows back. the whispers faded, and there was a sense of peace, of release. The curse was breaking. The souls were being freed. Mardan fell to his knees, his vision swimming as the last of the darkness slipped away. He could hear the voices of his ancestors, now soft and filled with gratitude, as they whispered their thanks. They were free. The curse was broken. But as the light grew, Mardan knew something. He was not in the mausoleum. The cold, suffocating air had been replaced by a warm breeze, and the graveyard had disappeared. He stood in a field surrounded by trees that were bathed in the soft light of the moon. The spirits of the Valewood stood before him, their faces peaceful, their forms glowing with a gentle light. "Mardan," the voice called out. It was the same voice he had heard in the mausoleum, but now it was warm and kind. "You have done it. You have freed us." Mardan looked up, his heart surging with relief and tears. The spirits of the Valewoods were no longer entombed in the graveyard. They were free, and he was free too. The curse had been broken, but at what a cost? And in that moment, Mardan understood that his journey had gone to its end. His punishment for the sins committed by his ancestors was over, and he could finally rest. The field was quiet except for the rustling leaves of trees swaying to and fro by the gentle caress of the breeze. As Mardan closed his eyes for good, he felt the tranquility drape over him with full consciousness, knowing he'd broken the curse and released souls long bound.